Ireland, great job. Your first time reading in church. Yay. So only a few of you will recognize the name Antoinette Brown Blackwell. And even if you have heard her name before, you might be thinking right now, who was that again? So you're in good company. Antoinette was the first woman ordained as a minister in any Christian denomination in the United States, all the way back in 1853. She's among those we like to call our UCC firsts. Like in 1785, Lemuel Haynes was the first black man in the U.S. ordained by any Christian denomination, and the first openly gay man ordained in the U.S. was Bill Johnson in 1972. There's another thing we like to say in the UCC is, we're not radical, we're just early. So Antoinette was born in 1825, the seventh of 10 children. Deeply religious as a child, she became a full member of the Congregational Church in Henrietta, New York, at the ripe old age of 9. Instead of doing the things she was expected to do, she preferred reading and writing over sewing and cooking. And in 1846, she attended Oberlin, a congregational school and the first coeducational college in the U.S. to grant women bachelor's degrees. So on a long walk one day with her sister-in-law, Lucy Stone, she told her plans to become a minister. And Lucy listened and sympathized, but then told her, you'll never be allowed to stand in a pulpit or preach in a church, and you'll certainly never be ordained. And Antoinette declared, I am going to do it. And so after she completed Oberlin's ladies' literary course, she asked to study theology. But the faculty refused to admit her, and even her family objected. Nevertheless, she persisted and insisted, and the college compromised and allowed her to attend lectures, but would not let her graduate with a degree or grant her a license to preach. She didn't care, and she went around preaching in any church that would have her anyway. And in 1853, the Congregational Church of South Butler ordained her. So in addition to being a minister, she was a prolific author and a tireless advocate for women's rights, and held prominent positions in the women's suffrage movement, alongside with her dear friends Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And she was the last one of them still alive when the 19th Amendment was finally passed in 1920. She won the long fight to vote at age 95. So we celebrate her ordination in 1853, even though no one outside the church in South Butler and only one male minister in the area recognized it, which is a whole other story. To take my class. So there were a few other women ordained in the 1880s, but still none were given a license to preach. And like Antoinette at Oberlin, Andover Seminary wouldn't admit or grant theological degrees to women, but they did allow Emma Newman to sit in on classes as a guest. And when she completed all the courses, they wouldn't give her a degree, but she was sent to Western Kansas anyway, because no men would take on churches like Dodge City, which had a membership of 4 cowboys. That is until they all took another job and moved away. And so from there, she crossed the prairie in a horse and buggy and served a church in Dial, Kansas for 6 years. Ever heard of Dial, Kansas? It's a ghost town today. But in 1883, the church in Dial requested her ordination, and the local association agreed unanimously. But the denomination back east resisted and said they wouldn't fund a church with a woman pastor. So they withdrew the request for ordination and sought for her to be licensed. And thus, Emma Newman was the first woman in history granted a license to preach. But such were the indignities faced by countless women to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, even though Jesus himself told Mary she had chosen the better part. But better? Really? I mean, as in Jesus set up Mary and Martha in a competition and declared Mary the winner? Martha, Martha, you're too focused on other things. Which are words that still sting women sitting in the pews on Sunday mornings who identify their gifts with Martha and rightly ask, okay, so who's going to feed everyone? But it might help to recognize that the story of Mary and Martha immediately follows a parable in which the crowd would be shocked to hear Jesus praise a Samaritan. It was last week's message. To them, there's no such thing as a good Samaritan, an unlikely recipient of praise. Well, here we are just a few verses later. Jesus praises Mary for sitting at his feet. Clearly the posture of a disciple. And given women's conventional roles, she was an unlikely disciple. And so anyone who would say, well, there's no such thing as a woman disciple, just like there's no such thing as a good Samaritan, well, Jesus affirms Mary's better part. Now, does Jesus mean to chastise Martha? I believe Jesus' intent was to affirm Mary's gifts and draw his circle wider, because there's another really significant story about Martha that does not center on her traditional role. You know that throughout the Gospels, Jesus honored women by revealing or confirming his identity to them before men. For example, in the Gospel of John, it was the unlikely Samaritan woman at the well who had 5 husbands. It was to her whom Jesus first revealed he is the Messiah. And so it is in the same way that Jesus revealed to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. And she replied, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. Which makes Martha the first person to make such a deeply theological and affirmative declaration of faith. You are the Christ. Clearly, she had been listening while baking bread. And isn't that the way some of us prefer to think about faith while doing some faith? So, just for fun, there's a little known tradition of Mary and Martha from the Middle Ages. After the death and resurrection of Jesus, they set off to proclaim the good news and sailed on the Mediterranean Sea until they reached the south of France. Mary found retreat near Marseille, in a cave 2,800 feet above on the side of a mountain, and spent the next 30 years in prayer and contemplation, occasionally leaving her place of solitude to, quote, pour the honey of the words